Welcome to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. This show is about bringing inspirational, creative, successful, and happy health professionals to you. Get ready to learn how you can be a happy doctor too. Do you ever just look at your bank account and realize, crap, I have no idea what I'm doing with my money? Or you don't really have a good sense of the way to spend or how to develop or cultivate what we're going to talk about in this conversation, which is called the wealthy mindset. Well, today you guys are going to learn a lot about finances from our next guest. She is a physician and financial expert, and she's going to talk about wealth and cultivating the wealthy mindset. If you want to start to get your financial game to the next level, this is the episode for you. So Bonnie Koo is a dermatologist, mother, and financial coach, and she has a mission to empower female physicians to build wealth and create the life that they want. What I love about Bonnie is her focus on time. It's not just about accumulating money. Time is our most precious commodity, and she wants us to learn how to handle money so we can use our time in the way that we see fit. Please also be sure to check out her website. It's wealthymommd.com. This episode is brought to you by MedFlash Go, and MedFlash Go is the first voice-based interactive medical question bank. And yes, myself and a couple of members designed this skill for Amazon Alexa, but we are incredibly passionate about it. And the reason we are is because, I can tell you from firsthand experience, it was so frustrating as a medical student to feel like I didn't have time to take care of myself and also study. And I think this is the exact tool I wish I had. The really cool thing is you can study while you're on the go. You can exercise. You can go on a commute, like on a long commute, and you can study in your car. You can literally be lying down in your bed and doing questions in your bed. There's so many ways to use MedFlash Go. To get started, all you have to do is get a Amazon device, such as a Dot or an Echo. The starting price for most of these are around $30. Once you get that Dot or device, you have to download MedFlash Go, and the skill itself is $10 a month. It's substantially cheaper and less expensive from other tools, and it lets you study while on the move, on the go. It saves you time, it saves you stress, and it's very cheap. So get on MedFlash Go. We love it. We're excited about it. Go to medflashgo.com to learn more. That's medflashgo.com to learn more about this amazing tool. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Happy Doc. I'm super excited for our next guest, Dr. Bonnie Koo, and she's with us today. There's so many reasons why I'm very excited for this episode and to interview her. For those guys who aren't watching us live right now, we're actually doing a live stream on Facebook while we're recording this. And it's amazing. First off, she lives like 3 blocks from me, which is hilarious. And it's really great to have her with us today. She is very interested in the finance world beyond just being a physician and a dermatologist. She has her own blog, which we're going to talk about. She wants to expand her business and her life in many different ways. And I'm just really excited to have an awesome conversation. Thank you for being on.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's so cool. Like, I can see my apartment building from your window right now. That's how close we live.
That's amazing. So I want us to basically jump right into it. So, one of the things that, got me interested specifically with what you're doing is your focus, first off, and not just being a physician, but I know that you want to build independence in your lifestyle in terms of finances. So let's first talk a little bit about what got you interested in medicine. And then I also want us to kind of focus again on what got your gears turning about the finances and money and building wealth.
Sure. I mean, I don't really have an origin story about why I became a doctor, but I've always loved science. And basically I came at a crossroads in college, and I was either going to go the PhD route. I was a biochem major, or I was going to see patients. And basically I decided I want to hang out with people, not a lab and test tubes. So that's kind of where that sort of started. But I took a detour. I didn't go to medical school until I was 27. So I was a non-traditional applicant, one of the older people in my class. I worked at Morgan Stanley for 4 years in New York City. I was in New York City during 9/11. And I always knew I was going to go to medical school, but I got a really great job offer out of college, so it was pretty hard to turn down. Basically got to live in London, all expenses paid for half a year, so it was pretty hard to turn down as a 21 or 22-year-old who had never left the country. So that was kind of a big deal for me. But I still wanted to become a doctor, and so I applied, and I went to Columbia University for medical school, and I am a dermatologist, and that was a long road. I don't want to go into the whole story, but I didn't get in until I applied the third time.
Wow. So, I mean, I could kind of get into that, but it sounds like you're not so interested in talking about it.
Oh, no, this could take a while. I'm happy to talk about it.
So I guess something, obviously, I mean, there's an important story there. I just, I talk about this a lot on the podcast too. Is the path is not always as linear as you want it to be, or
right.
you think it's going to be direct. You think you're going to go from high school to college to med school to matching, and then your life is beautiful and wonderful in your mind, right?
Right.
I think we all think that way. So, I mean, again, we don't have to go too deep into it, but it wasn't that direct for you. So how difficult was that part of your life?
It's obviously we all know that dermatology is super hard to get into. And so that, the risk of not matching is super real. It happens all the time. In fact, another classmate of mine also didn't match, or she's also a dermatologist. So it worked out for her as well. And I think, I just came to a point where I was like, well, I either do something else, another specialty. And obviously a lot of options were open to me. But I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And basically I was like, well, I'm going to be whatever age I was at the time, I'm going to be 40 no matter what at some point. So I'm either going to be a dermatologist or I'm not. So to me, it didn't really, basically I was derm or bust. But I will say when I graduating, a top medical school, not having matched, it did kind of suck at the time. Kind of was like, this should be a great day, but I was really sad. I had an internship lined up, but that was it.
Right.
And then I applied again as an intern, which many people say don't do that unless your application hasn't changed because there's no reason for you to get in again.
Right.
So I didn't get in again. And at that point I was like, okay, what do I do? And hasn't that much time has passed, but I don't remember the specifics, but basically at that time you had to basically do research and hope the research would get you a position or do research at an institution where they had a track record for taking those research fellows. So that's what I ended up doing research at UC Irvine for 2 years, and I matched at UC Irvine. So I lived in Southern California for a few years, which wasn't a bad place to live.
No, definitely not. I mean, nice and warm over there.
So
yeah. So basically it was just, the path was a little longer, but you kept at it. You had that research position at UC Irvine, and then that led to dermatology. Okay, so now you're going through dermatology. You're resident. Were there any difficulties? Was it a pretty smooth experience? Did you enjoy being, a derm resident? How was that for you?
Oh yeah, derm residency was great. I mean, going from an intern to a derm residency is just like night and day. Our hours, I mean, they are very regular. We take call, but it's derm call. Let's just be honest. There's not too many emergencies. Although I did, the residents would go in most of the time, not so much the attending. But I loved the people I did residency with. It was a great program. We worked at the VA, Kaiser, a private practice setting. So I felt really well trained. And Southern California, you can't really beat that in terms of skin cancer or exposure to skin cancer, I should say. So plenty of practice in that realm. So no, I loved the residency. It's funny. Back then, I didn't love living in Southern California. Looking back, it's like, what's wrong with me? But I'm from New York City. So when you're a New York City person, SoCal is just kind of like weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I'm from the West Coast and you're from the East Coast. And I came here, and I think, that kind of chill, relaxed attitude for some people doesn't work out. Although Southern California is different than Northern California.
Yes.
So, I mean, we don't have to go into a whole spiel about the different personalities and the culture there. But needless to say, you felt like the East Coast was a better fit.
Well, that's so the reason why I left is I was okay staying out there, but I was single. And so in my mind, and it's just funny, like what we make up to ourselves. But basically I was in Orange County and I was like, I don't think I'm going to meet the type of guy that I would like in Southern California for whatever reason. And I just felt, well, so that's sort of why I moved back to New York City. Plus it was home for me. My family's there and everything, and I missed it. But if I had met someone out there, or, things had worked out for me to stay there, I was open to staying there.
Right. So you didn't necessarily, but you didn't have anything at that time grounding you to the West Coast. So you're like, okay, might as well be closer to family.
Exactly.
And then you moved over. Okay. So fast forward, practicing dermatologist, and you were going through that process. Now things had shifted for you at some point, right? So you weren't necessarily feeling as enthusiastic, or you wanted to change your career in some way. Where was that shift? Because obviously you're doing a lot more than just dermatology now.
Yeah, so that sort of happened totally by accident. So that origin story sort of starts during residency. So I was, I was a total mess when it came to money. I mean, just thinking of intern year. I did intern year I lived in Brooklyn. I did my internship in Long Island, so that was a little bit of a drive, but I was younger back then, so I could handle it.
Right.
And I just spent, we actually got paid pretty well as an intern, and my apartment was cheap. I had like 2 other roommates, you know how it is. So I just was, small rent, even in New York City. And I spent so much money. I actually racked up $20,000 of credit card debt during intern year. I'm pretty sure it was intern year, or at least that's when I realized I had $20,000.
Yeah.
So maybe I had that debt from medical school, who knows? And, I kind of went through residency, and literally my last year of derm residency, I overheard 2 of my co-residents talking about money, and there were 2 dudes. And they always talked about money, so this wasn't like the first time they were talking about it. But for some reason, I was like, how do you guys know all this stuff? Like, where'd you guys get this info? Because they always talked about the stock market and their investments. So first, I've always been like, how do you guys have money to invest? Like, that's not normal as a resident, right?
Right.
And they were like, oh, you should read this book called The White Coat Investor. And I'm like, what's that? And then I ordered the book, and I read it in a weekend. It's a really short book. This is his first book. He's got 2 books now. And then I just started, like, I'm one of those people that once I kind of get into something, I just like literally find everything I could. And in this day and age, there's just so much free information out there. I think part of it's like sifting through it and figuring out what's correct, what's not, what's going to work for you. And, when you're somewhat specialized as a physician, you kind of want to read something written by a physician, or like you want to know what other doctors are into, right?
Right.
So the White Coat Investor has done a great job in that, you can trust him. So I think I read almost every blog post he ever put out. And then I pretty much read about anything that applied to me. So I was applying for my first job out of residency. I worked for a large hospital. It was in academics. So I was looking up what plans they had, and I would literally read everything I could about it. And that's sort of how it started. And then the next thing I knew, I feel like Facebook groups they were kind of like exploding around that time. And there's all these Facebook groups with women physicians in them. So one of my friends sort of realized that I was into money, and she was like, oh, there's a finance group for women physicians. You should join it. So she added me, and I started answering everyone's questions, and I sort of realized that I actually had more knowledge than the average person in the group. And then next thing you know, my friends are like, you should start a blog. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It's like the last thing and I didn't even know what that meant. Like, a lot of people had blogs back then, like just personal blogs. You know what I'm talking about? Everyone had like, hey, follow my life. I mean, no one read these things.
Right.
But a lot of people had blogs. And so, it's like $100 to start a blog. So I was like, all right. And plus, the people were asking the same questions over and over again. So I was like, oh, I could write a blog post, and then I could just link the blog post. So that's just sort of how it started. That was 2.5 years ago.
Amazing. So basically what I'm hearing is you had like maybe a small interest. You overheard the guys talking. You read the White Coat Investor, and then one thing sort of led to another with the Facebook groups and the community. And then you're like, okay, let's try a blog. And then first off, let's plug in your blog. What's the link for your blog?
So my blog is called Wealthy Mom MD. I started the blog out as Miss Bonnie MD, so that's still sort of out there, but it'll redirect you to the new website.
Beautiful. So you started your blog, Wealthy Mom MD?
You got it.
Okay, perfect. And it kind of grew from there. Now, from my understanding, it's pretty successful. Like, you were having a good amount of visitorship and people reading. How many people do you think visit your website?
Oh, I know I should know this. It ebbs and flows depending on, how the blog post gets shared. So I can't give you an exact number.
Yeah.
I feel like my presence is more in the Facebook groups, but but not everyone's on Facebook,
right?
As you know. We think everyone is, but no, not everyone is.
True. Yeah.
So
very, very true. No, I mean, like, not necessarily like specifics, but do you feel like it surprisingly has gotten a little bit more traction than you thought? Do you feel like people have kind of seen it more than you would have imagined?
Oh, so that's a good question because, I'm in private practice now in the Philadelphia area, and I have patients who mention my blog or they listen to the when I'm on Carrie's show.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because one thing I've noticed doing all this is patients, like, they're Googling you, right? Most patients will Google you before they come see you. And, for the average physician, all they see is, your practice website, and most doctor websites aren't that great. Mm-hmm. Or they look at your Yelp reviews, which is worse. Because, like, the thing is, most of these reviews are bad because mostly the angry people post reviews on Yelp or Google or website.
Right.
But if you Google me, that stuff comes up, but then my blog and also the other stuff comes up, and then people get into this. It's funny because I'll actually have discussions with me, and where I work is actually a lot of finance companies, and so a lot of my patients work for some of the larger financial companies, so it's kind of funny. We end up talking about money a lot.
Yeah. But what you're saying is basically like anyone with their own practice who wants to develop their practice, having that website presence shows them another side of you, and maybe in fact you might even get more patients or more, I would assume, is trust in some ways because they understand a little bit more about you.
Well, as a podcaster, I'm sure you know that, in terms of developing credibility and trust for whether it's a patient or for you, for listeners, is you're reading a blog post is one way. If you put out consistent blog content, then someone says, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. Right. But then when they hear your voice, there's a different level. They almost feel like they know you because they know your voice. And then obviously video is the number one medium in terms of developing that likability and trust with other people. So a lot of doctors are putting little videos on their websites of them so that they can, a way to for a patient to meet you before meeting you in person. So I think that's actually a whole nother conversation. But I actually think there's a whole world out there where doctors could totally market themselves in a better way these days.
Totally. I mean, social media is just such a big game. And I feel like, unfortunately, like I was talking to an entrepreneur about this concept before, but basically physicians are at least 5 years behind.
Oh yeah, totally.
At least. So like when entrepreneurs are on the edge of like what's new, right? Whereas physicians are more conservative in nature, which makes sense, right? If there's a new treatment out there, you're not necessarily testing all your patients with the latest and greatest thing because you don't want to hurt your patients, right? So we tend to be more pragmatic. We want to watch to see what's happening and then we implement, right? Well, in entrepreneurship, it doesn't work. That doesn't work. You have to be ahead of the game. Social media. We're not going to necessarily get into that. But I want to focus a little bit on the finance piece. So you started mentioning an interest. You mentioned that you racked up like $20,000 in credit card debt. Out of curiosity, did you have a bunch of loans in medical school as well, or were you able to get out of that part of it?
No, I had about 200. I think it was 210 when I was. So it was 150 when I graduated med school, and I remember thinking, oh, 150 is not bad because I knew what it could have been.
Right.
But then by the time I finished intern and residency and everything was delayed because I didn't get in 3 times.
Right.
Remember, the interest capitalized and it was like $210,000. So that means $60,000 was interest.
Right.
And like back then, it's like all like student loans were like play money. I was like, all right, it's like a number. It doesn't seem real until you have to start paying it back.
Totally.
So,
yeah. So you were looking at 210 plus the extra 20,000 in credit card debt, probably, right? So maybe around 230. I know that the average right now is even worse. I'm actually, like, just as a personal example, I'm at around 260 and I'm on the low end because I actually had a scholarship in med school to help with some of it. So that's pretty crazy, right?
I had a scholarship too.
Right. So you had a scholarship. So you actually might not have even been the highest. I mean, on the extreme end, I know someone specifically who has about $500,000 in loan debt. So from your knowledge base right now, because I know there's people out there that have that debt, what do you wish you would have known about finances earlier, or something you wish you'd have started sooner to help start to either alleviate those costs or just kind of get the ball rolling for finances?
I think I see a lot of people taking interest in finances early, which is fantastic. I don't think it's prudent to spend so much time on it as like a medical student, for example, because you can't really do much about it, right? You got to pay for school. And if you're in med school and you want to be a doctor and your only solution is loan, like I'm not quite sure what else you'll do. I mean, that's a whole conversation. But assuming, you're going to rack up these loans, I guess the question is, what can you do about it? But I do think, you're having some basic financial knowledge. But I do think the way finances are taught even now, the different avenues you can learn it, there is still a sort of pervasive, I'm not quite sure how to say it, but money is like it's a very charged subject for a number of reasons. And the more I learned about money, the more I realized, and this might sound really woo-woo, but money's not even really real if you really think about it. And, you basically can take an approach that money is scarce and there's only so much money in the world and you're only going to get so much of it. And that's just not a great sort of mindset to have. Or you can have the mindset that there is plenty of money in the world. And I think being a physician is obviously one way to make money. And obviously when you become a doctor, that's your profession. That's what most people end up sticking with. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think in this day and age when people have such a large loan debt, and if you go into a field that traditionally pays less, I mean, you pretty much have a few choices. You're either going to basically live super frugally the rest of your life to pay off these loans and have a rewarding career. And that's totally fine. That's one way to look at it. But if you're someone who's like, okay, well, I chose to be, I'm just picking pediatrician because they're traditionally one of the lower paid specialties. I'm a pediatrician and I don't want to live freely the rest of my life. And I have $500,000 in debt. So what are my choices? What can I do? Because then the natural answer is I have to make more money.
Right.
Maybe that means not being a pediatrician or they have to have a side hustle. And it kind of opens up this other can of worms. But there are many ways to build wealth. And a job is really just one way.
Yeah.
It's kind of a long answer, but.
No, it makes sense, right? I mean, And I've done a little bit of digging in my own life because finances are very important to me as well. And there's just, pun intended, I guess, there's a wealth of information about wealth.
Right.
And there's a lot of things I didn't realize. One of the things you touched on, actually, that might be a really good point. It's basically one of the answers you gave, was there is a mindset or psychology of wealth that I don't think people really get. What are your thoughts around the psychology? Because from my understanding of it, like you mentioned something, like if your brain is in scarcity mode, if you don't think you have enough, it's really hard to build wealth. So how is your mindset, or what are some things you learned about the mindset of wealth? Well,
it's like going to the gym. You go to the gym, you work out. I mean, you're a gymnast. So I wish I could go to the gym, do 10 sit-ups, and I'd be set for the rest of life. But as you know, you got to keep doing it or else you lose the muscle. And the same thing is with your mindset, whether it's about money, it's about life, your positive outlook. I wish it's something you could just do once, but literally working at your mind, working at your thoughts is sort of an everyday thing. It's a practice. So I guess, what was your question exactly?
Well, what have you learned about the mindset of wealth, or how's your mindset changed around like making money, for example?
Yeah, so it's kind of a roller coaster, but in general, I guess, my outlook on money has changed from one of fear, and part of it's the way you grew up, right? Because the way I grew up in a, I guess, lower middle class. I don't really know like what sort of label to put on it, but we used to live in a house, then we literally moved into a smaller place every time we moved. So then we ended up living in a tiny apartment. I shared a room with my brother. And so to me, when I was growing up, for me, money was, we didn't have enough. Like I never starved. It was never nothing like that. And we always ate very well. I was a chubby kid, if anything. But there were certain things I knew that I couldn't do because there wasn't enough money.
Right.
So I remember like knowing that very well. And for some reason, my parents ended up living in actually a relatively affluent town in northern New Jersey. And so my classmates were all much wealthier than my parents. Like I would go to their house and I'd be like mesmerized by how big their house was and all the nice stuff they had. And we just didn't have that.
Yeah.
And so to me, money was something that we didn't have a lot of. And so And I also was raised in a pretty religious household, and I was kind of brought up to think that money was the root of all evil. And
right. Money is the root of all evil. I like that.
Yeah. And that, if you want money, you're greedy. And it was all these negative connotations. And so basically you kind of have to unpack your past money history. I know people talk about that a lot, but it's so true because someone actually told me, like, do this exercise, log into your checking account and how do you feel when you look at the money? Mm-hmm. And I guess the goal is to really it should be neutral. Like, it's just data.
Right.
Right. And you just look at it like data. Because basically you log in your eye, you're like, oh my God, there's nothing there. Or you're logging, you're like, wow, there's lots of money. But it's like, money's so strange because most people relate to money as what it can do for them.
Right.
Like, money is something we need so we can buy food. And this is true, but it is a tool, and it's just interesting. It just depends how you were brought up, basically.
Right. Yeah, and there's a few things you mentioned there I think, are also interesting too. Like, every time you moved into a smaller home, right? Mm-hmm. So like, I'm curious, I mean, like, we don't have to go into this, but mm-hmm. I'm wondering if every time you move you get nervous, you know what I mean? Because it's like almost like your associations, your life got shrunk.
Oh.
You know what I mean? I don't want to go into that, but like, I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. But money is the root of all evil, right? So many people think about money in that way. That's an interesting point. But then what you realize is, like, money, like, the way I look at money and like some of the books I read is like, money's like energy, mm-hmm. right? So like, energy is not good or bad. It's just energy, and you have the choice how you use your money, right? So money's not evil. If you're an evil person, you use money in an evil way, right?
Oh, totally. Yep.
So like,
mm-hmm.
if you're a terrible person, you're using it to harm other people. But if you're a good person, you can use your money not only to feed yourself, but to feed other people and give them lots of good stuff, right? Like, I would argue in a lot of ways, you're using your money in a good way. You're trying to provide better services on your blog. For example, you and I just had talked about how you're interested in doing a podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And forming your own podcast and forming other stuff. And you want to use your money to spread good knowledge.
Right.
So that's a way of cycling good things using money, right? So, but I think we could talk about the psychology, of money ad nauseum, right? Like, there's just no way. One thing I'm really interested with you is the why. Okay, so a lot of people,
right?
I think the why of anyone is super important. I mean, we could talk about the why for a long time, but mm-hmm. every person has a core reason, right? Why they want to develop financial independence. I know that's really important for you. That's really important for me. What do you think gets you excited about building your wealth? What's the reason that you kind of...
That is such a great question, because that really kind of drives everything. So what is my why? So for me, it's a number of things, but I think, so when I first learned about money, just to backtrack a bit, and I first learned about the idea of financial dependence, my first thought was, oh, it's too late for that's never, not that it's never going to happen, but I read the numbers, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'm going to be like 60. Mm-hmm. Because I'm almost 42 right now, because I was 38 when I graduated my residency. So I crunched the numbers and I'm like, I'll be 60. And it's so funny. It's like, that's not like a bad age to retire, quote unquote. But then, like, you read these blogs and people retiring early, you get like a little FOMO. You're like,
yeah,
what the hell, right?
Totally.
So then I was like, well, it's too late. That's just the way it is. It's fine. I was like, whatever. I accepted it. I'm not going to be a fire blog. I'm just not there yet. So, but then the more I learned about the whole, financial dependence movement, and then I was like, well, it's not really, I mean, it is about being FI. Like, it's great to be like, oh, I reached FI, I've got this much money, whatever. But for me, it became more like a lifestyle and also mindset, mm-hmm. because I think, what FIRE represents for people, at least my opinion.
Can you spell out FIRE for people who don't know?
Yeah, FIRE stands for financial independence, retire early. I'm more into the FI part, not so much the RE part, because I don't think I'll ever just retire and like sit at the beach. Like, that's just not something you and I would probably ever do.
Yeah, no.
So for me, it's more about the FI, but FIRE sounds better than FI. Anyway, so it really is more about the lifestyle, meaning, I think it's the whole like life is short mentality, and because truly life is short. You don't know when your time is. And I had sort of a series of events where people close to me passed, or people I knew were getting sick. And ironically, we're both doctors, and so we see people get ill all the time.
Right.
But I think just a series of things happened to me, and I really was like, oh my God, life is really short. Like, why? What am I waiting for? Like, life's too short to not do something because you're scared to do it.
Sure.
And now that I have a toddler, he's 18 months when we're recording this, And I look at him and I look at, Matt, my fiance, we have his son, my stepson, who's 12. And it's like, there's just so much more we would love to give to them as parents, really our time and attention. Mm-hmm. And so we just wanted the ability to spend more time with them,
right?
Work on stuff that we're passionate about that makes a difference, and basically be able to travel when we want to.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of people like feel like their why or the reason they're doing this, if they're doing, has to be really big, right? But like you gave it really simply, like you want more time for your family,
right.
You want time to do your passion work, right? You want time. And that concept we've actually talked about too, which is a lot of people think about wealth and money as having massive quantities of money. Mm-hmm. But another way of looking at it, which you totally get, is being time rich.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Time wealth, right? So time is one of our most precious commodities, and something that physicians, and something I never realized until I started reading about all this stuff, is we're trading our time for money. Mm-hmm. Right. And we actually
that's what most people do. Yeah.
And we had briefly talked about that before. And when you trade your time for money, you realize how precious your time is, because you can't give to those people you love. You can't do those things that you want to do. And when you were meeting those challenges of crap, like of mortality in a way, like you don't know when you're going to die. And we all feel that way at some point. It's like, wait, my time is super precious. Mm-hmm. So, can you talk to us a little bit about that time for money trade-off and what you are working on to kind of circumvent that?
So one of my favorite quotes, and I don't know who said it, is rich people have money and wealthy people have time. Like you totally just nailed it. Because that's honestly that's one of the reasons why I actually rebranded to the name Wealthy Mom MD. And wealthy obviously means money, but to me it also means time and just like a mindset and a lifestyle. So one thing I learned from the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, which we talked about just before we started the podcast, is he calls a job a short-term solution to a long-term problem. If you think about that, that's true, because most people have a job to make money and need money to like pay the bills, pay rent, etc. So that's short, but you really need the long-term solution, because you're not going to work forever. I mean, that's the goal, right?
Right.
And I actually, millennials get a lot of, crap. But I will say one thing, and I don't have anything against millennials. I'm not a millennial, but I think one thing they've really done for everyone is I think they've really espoused the whole not trading time for money and sort of living in the now, and, life is short, and sort of, in some ways they are leading the FIRE movement in terms of the lifestyle of FIRE. Mm-hmm. So I got off track. What was your question?
No, I'm just the
whole time thing. Yes. Yeah. So basically, to generate wealth, meaning to not trade time for money, you have to build assets, and assets are a number of things. And I think the easiest thing that most people talk about is you invest in the stock market, you invest in an index fund. That's like super easy. It is. It also takes a long time. So if you're young and you start now, that will compound to a lot of money by the time you're, done with your career. But when you're a little older like me, it'll still work. It just takes a long time. And that's why when I did the numbers, I'm like, I'm going to retire at 60 plus. And not that that's depressing, but I just remember thinking like, I guess I won't be in the FIRE camp. And there's nothing wrong with not being in the FIRE camp. But basically, as this whole blog got a bit more popular and I sort of realized, another sort of passionate skill that I had. So one thing I realized, so I was doing, writing this blog and everything, and I kind of was like, well, what do I actually do? Am I like help people with money? Like I actually sat down like, what do I do? And actually when I was doing this rebrand, I actually had a lot of trouble with describing what I did. People ask, well, what do you do? And you're like, I do money stuff for doctors. Like I didn't really have like a tight tagline.
Right.
And one thing, I just got this like 2 weeks ago, Taylor.
Yeah.
I'm a coach.
You're a coach.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm a financial coach. That's pretty much, that's what I do.
Yeah.
Another way to build assets is to run a business. Mm-hmm. But running a business in some ways is still trading time for money. So I'm working on that.
Right.
I'm also working on real estate, and real estate is a faster path to wealth than the stock market. And really, you see real estate, people either say yes, or people say, oh my God, that's like, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to run properties. And there's all these misconceptions. But one thing I've learned, and as an entrepreneur, you'll appreciate this, is if this was easy, this meaning whether it's real estate, whether it's being an entrepreneur, we're running our businesses, if this was easy, everyone would do it.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
100%. No, I love everything you said. I mean, so like the things I've learned, I'm kind of piggybacking off what you said is, so assets are huge, right? So you mentioned like the stock market, real estate. There's many different pathways. There's a book I read. It's like the fast lane to millionaire, I think is what it's called. But anyways, there's different lanes of making wealth, right? There's different ways to do it. The earlier you start, the better. I think it's totally important if you actually want to build a larger amount of wealth to educate yourself on the different forms, right? So you mentioned stocks, you mentioned real estate. There's a number of other passive income streams. I mean, we could talk about podcasting. Podcasting in itself has allowed me to generate an audience, which will later, if I ever form a product, which I actually just did, is a funnel or way for my audience to know that I've generated something. I've provided good faith and good value to them. And they'll be like, oh, I'd love, I've provided value. Yeah. I'd love to help Taylor out. Right. So like for us, we just created our first Alexa skill, and that's a whole new form of assets, right? Technology, all these things. But the other side of it too is like, if you're a physician, you're in the top 1%. Like I think if you make over like 150K or something, you're in like the top 1%. I don't know what the number is. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But you're in the top 1% of society, right? But as you know, being a physician, having that money doesn't make you happy.
Right.
Right. So this is the Happy Doc. We actually mentioned like, the concept of money, and we were having a conversation about physicians versus lawyers. So what were you telling me earlier about that whole idea?
Oh yeah. So I feel like it's almost cool to be an ex-lawyer. Like I was a lawyer, but I was miserable. Now I'm a pastry chef. Like I feel like I see these stories a lot. Maybe because I have a lot of lawyer friends. I don't know if you have lawyer friends, but I don't know any lawyer that likes being a lawyer. And it's like the goal is to get out of it.
Right.
I'm not making fun of lawyers, but I feel like that's just a much more common thing I hear. But it's not like you hear physicians saying, oh, I'm an ex-dermatologist. Like you don't really hear that, first of all. I'm just using that since I'm a dermatologist. But I was saying how I almost feel weird for even trying to do something else when I supposedly have a good gig as a dermatologist.
Yeah. And do you feel guilty that sometimes you're not enjoying it? Like you feel like you should be enjoying your field, and sometimes you're like, I don't really like this right now?
So I love dermatology. I don't love being an employee, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I basically was at a crossroads where I was like, I'm going to start my own practice, or I need to work on this business. And I think I have issues with like physical commitments. Okay. No, I'm serious. Like I've literally moved like every 1 or 2 years, like the past 20 years. Okay. And so maybe there's some stuff I got to unpack there. But
this isn't a psych session.
But opening a practice means I have to pick a place and stay there for a long period of time. Otherwise you can't be successful, right? Right. Or I guess I could do teledermatology, but you know what I'm saying? Like I would have to pick a location and stay there for a while. And basically that just wasn't in the cards because we're actually moving in a few months. So I think Matt and I decided that we really valued the ability or the possibility of having location independence for our business. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's talk about, we're moving a little bit towards like your future. You're going to be moving soon. And what do you see yourself, or what do you envision are your financial goals and like life goals in the future? I mean, you have all this knowledge. You get that you want to be more like time rich. You get that you want to build wealth. How do you see yourself personally doing that?
So I am taking a chance, and I have decided to really kind of go all in on the business. And so we're moving in 2 months. That means I gave notice to my job, and I am taking a short locums gig for the summer. So I'm switching to locums. And it's so funny. Carrie does locums, and Nee and his wife, Nee Darko and his wife do locums. And they basically say, once you go locums, you don't want to go back. And it's kind of true because locums is this like these short-term commitments. You're not committing to a job, basically. I mean, it's a job, but it's a short-term thing. So basically I'm doing locums to kind of tide us over financially for now. We've got some money saved up. My Wealthy Mom and Dee does make some income, nowhere near a dermatologist income yet, but I'm hoping to change that. And so we're taking a chance. So I think I've given myself 6 months to a year to do that. And Matt also isn't working at this time. He's not a physician, for those of you who don't know him. And he is going to learn about real estate investing.
Amazing. And you mentioned you wanted to go all in on the business. And earlier you'd mentioned to me and talked to me about like going to conferences and things like that. There must have been, I'm imagining when you were going to conferences and stuff, something that like your mind just blew up and you realized like, this is the place to be right now. Do you know what I mean? What were some of those things that you were getting from the conferences and the networking that made you realize that maybe going all in the business was a better decision? Because there had to have been indicators, right?
Oh, yeah. Something you said earlier, how doctors in general were kind of conservative, or kind of 5 years. I say that all the time to other people because when I talk to other doctors who are interested in being entrepreneurs, or they are entrepreneurs and they're working on their hustle and they're trying to like learn, because you got to learn. Just like you want to become a doctor, you go to medical school. So what do you do when you want to be an entrepreneur? You don't ask other doctors, in my opinion, because we're all 5 years behind.
Right.
You go to where the entrepreneurs hang out.
Right.
Right. So I went to one of those conferences about a month ago. You would have loved it. I mean, it was just so amazing to be in a room full of 1,000 other entrepreneurs doing.
Which convention was this?
This was the Kajabi Impact Summit. Do you know what Kajabi is?
No.
Kajabi's it's a website, but they're an online platform that can host your website, online course, community. They kind of like an all-in-one solution versus you buying like 10 other pieces of software.
Sure.
But it was by Kajabi, but the speakers were all people that you might know. Brendan Bouchard. These are sort of like motivational speakers. Rachel Hollis was there. Amy Porterfield. These are entrepreneurs who are making $5 to $10 million a year. So they're experts, and they all happen to use Kajabi. That's kind of why they had those speakers. But it was just amazing to have the energy in the room, and like just the passion.
Right.
And sometimes I feel like we're pretty passionate people as doctors, but when you meet people who aren't doctors, you kind of forget that there are other people out there besides us sometimes, because you kind of run in these doctor circles and you forget all these other people who want to make a difference in the world and not physicians. Because sometimes I think we think only physicians can really make a true difference.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing too, I mean, I went to, for example, there was a Tony Robbins, Gary Vaynerchuk kind of conference and motivational event here in Philly that we went to.
Yeah.
And the one thing that like doctors, I feel like, doctors are really good at helping people on the singular level. Like we have our single patients. Right. But in entrepreneurship in the business world and now social media, you get to go macro.
Yeah, totally.
And so the passion, the excitement is different. The other thing about entrepreneurs is they develop their own schedules. So like, for example, you don't like working for someone, right? But when you work for yourself, you are intrinsically motivated at a different level to do something, right? So I know for a fact one of the reasons you got excited is because the energy level was ridiculous. But the energy level there is ridiculous because those people are energetically really aligned. Right. So, I mean, we talk about burnout and everything. Now they're, one of the conversations around, it's called moral injury. I don't know if you like kind of saw that.
I saw that video, yeah.
Yeah, so moral injury is another way of describing it. But that's because doctors always have to make these like nuanced kind of decisions where they're not sure if they're helping their patient or not. But when you're an entrepreneur and you build your life, you make all the decisions. You don't have to make any morally odd decisions for yourself. You can make the decision that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And so you don't have all these little like mental discrepancies in what you want to do. So I'm really excited for you. I think this will be cool to.
Yeah, I'm excited to share with you what I learned. It's actually, when I was at this conference, I was like, oh my God, I was like thinking of all my doctor friends who are entrepreneurs. Like they have to come to this, because I think we're sort of learning from other doctors. Like I said, we're sort of limited because we're in a doctor bubble. Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So. Totally. And that's another big conversation, like the bubbles, like silos right now. So like the other problem with social media right now is if you like a lot of your friends' stuff, you end up, I forgot the term, but there's a term for like, I forgot. It's like voice bubbles. Basically like the stuff you like if you're conservative and you like a lot of conservative stuff, all you see is conservative stuff.
Got it.
If you are a physician and you like a bunch of physician stuff, all you see is physician social media channels. So the problem is we're siloing each other off. So we're just it's called echo chambers. So we're getting into our echo chambers, and that's another issue with social media right now. People who are negative and see all this negative stuff and comment on those things, they see a lot of negative news. So it's interesting how social media is impacting us. Again, whole other kind of conversation. For the rest of our talk, what I kind of just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. What makes you happy?
What makes me happy?
I know it's a very simple. It's actually a hard question too.
Honestly, simple things like my cup of coffee every morning. And what makes me even happier is now that Matt isn't working, I just pressed a button in the morning because it's pre-made from the day before. The water's poured, the coffee grounds are there, and I just pressed a button every morning and the coffee's ready. By the time I get out of the bathroom.
What's something that energizes you? You mentioned coffee. It sounds like one of them. What's something else?
Coffee and honestly hanging out with people like you. Like-minded people who want to change the world.
Beautiful. I love it. And I can go off on a little spiel here. This could be a whole other topic, but how important is your network? The network of people that you hang out with, like how much does that impact you?
Oh, I mean, that is literally everything. And they even say it, if you went to a Tony Robbins event, he talks a lot about I think he uses the term inner circle. The top 5 or 6 people that you spend the most time with kind of determine your success, future, even your net worth.
Yeah, and the big reason for that is because we're so impacted by relationships. Mm-hmm. You mentioned how your past really impacts the way you look at wealth, but your inner circle really impacts the way you look at wealth. So when you're trying to accumulate money or wealth or do something new and all the people around you are saying, like, what are you doing? Well, are they inspiring you or are they pulling you down? And a lot of times when people shift their mindset, they end up losing friends. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's kind of happened to you before where you just don't really connect with certain people anymore.
Definitely over time, friendships change. And I think as, I've really made it sort of a goal to keep growing, personally in mindset. And that takes effort. And I actually have my own life business coach. But yeah, I guess my advice would be try to find some rich friends.
There we go.
It's true.
Because they probably have a mindset or a network or something that if that's kind of what you're trying to reach, they
think differently than people who don't have money.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Not only think, but they act differently. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the one thing when someone's in your literal inner circle and right. You're able to hang out with them, and that's why I'm really happy Danny's with us right now because he can hang out with us because there's a difference between us thinking what they're doing and actually seeing it, you know what I mean? Right. So it's really great when you get that immersive experience. If you were Danny's age, for example, Danny here's our intern, he's in high school. If you were Danny's age, what are some things that you wish you would have known and you would want him to implement in his life today? You can actually literally look at him and say it too.
Well, this is good timing because my stepson, who's 12, he's in 6th grade, and I asked him to write a blog post for me, and I gave him guidelines. Oh, I don't want to say I made him, but I said, why don't you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad? And I asked him to give me the 5 lessons he got. And so the next day he came up to me and he's like, Bonnie, I need help buying assets. What 12-year-old says that? So basically, my advice to you would be, really understand the difference between an asset and a liability, because most Americans, I should say, think that their that their liabilities are assets, but they're really liabilities.
And so it sounds to me like reading books and learning from these people would be...
And learning by example, because if you grew up with parents who didn't know anything about money, you're not going to learn about money.
Right.
So...
Right. And it's not that there's anything wrong with them. They just didn't get that knowledge or wisdom. It's just that you also have to realize that there's other people that have been learning lessons and habits that might be more successful.
Right. And they don't teach you in school.
They don't. Yeah, everything you really want to learn is not in school. I feel like that's...
No, it's true.
Which is, yeah. Now that we're going to be closing out this conversation, was there anything you felt like you really wanted to talk about that we might not have touched base or talked about?
I guess, so my brand's called Wealthy Mom MD, and I guess I should say my niche or my target audience, obviously are women physicians, physician moms. And so I do think we are a special group of people for a number of reasons. Well, being a physician is hard enough. And then being a mom is like another full-time job. And most of us are truly, honestly, I think we're heroes because we are saving lives and we have our own little people to raise. And most of us are also partners in a relationship. And so we truly are juggling multiple things. So I feel really honored that I can serve my people and really help them, create a life that's going to serve them. And so, obviously I've discussed what I'm doing and what's working for me, but that doesn't mean that that's what everyone else wants. But I think in general, if people can, or women can have money work for them, they can truly create the life that works for them, whatever that is.
Beautiful. I love that. And one thing that's very specific about like what you want, you said that you're a coach. Every human being has a unique set of circumstances. And so like when we're talking about money and wealth and finances, like what we're talking about is so general, it would never touch people. And so that real like one-on-one kind of work that you want to do and to help people and the online blogging and, touching base with people and coaching them through it is so important because like you said yourself, you have your own coach.
Right.
So we all need people out there to kind of watch what we're doing and kind of get us towards our direction.
Yeah, kind of give you a little nudge.
Little nudge.
Like, hey.
Yeah. Like, hey, you talked about doing this, but you're not doing this. What's going on?
Right.
So kind of like showing us the direction we need to go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. That was super fun. And
well, I'm glad we finally did this.
Yeah, and I would love to have you on again and see what your progress is like.
Sure.
All right. Take care, guys. Hey guys, if you want to get even more interactive with our Happy Doc community, there's 2 areas I think you guys should follow. Go onto Instagram and follow at Happy Doc Podcast. We're doing a lot of live videos. And also join the Facebook group, The Happy Doc Lounge. These episodes are recorded live quite often on the Facebook group, so check those channels out. This episode is brought to you by MedFlash and MedFlash is the first voice-based interactive medical question bank. And yes, myself and a couple of members designed this skill for Amazon Alexa, but we are incredibly passionate about it. And the reason we are is because, I can tell you from firsthand experience, it was so frustrating as a medical student to feel like I didn't have time to take care of myself and also study. And I think this is the exact tool I wish I had. The really cool thing is you can study while you're on the go. You can exercise. You can go on a commute, like on a long commute, and you can study in your car. You can literally be lying down in your bed and doing questions in your bed. There's so many ways to use MedFlash Go. To get started, all you have to do is get a Amazon device, such as a Dot or an Echo. The starting price for most of these are around $30. Once you get that Dot or device, you have to download MedFlash Go, and the skill itself is $10 a month. It's substantially cheaper and less expensive from other tools, and it lets you study while on the move, on the go. It saves you time, it saves you stress, and it's very cheap. So get on MedFlash Go. We love it. We're excited about it. Go to medflashgo.com to learn more. That's medflashgo.com to learn more about this amazing tool. Thanks for tuning in to the Happy Doc Podcast, and I wish you an amazing day.